Wait a second, this is supposed to be a voice reveal. Alright, let me put some subtitles up here, and we're good. So about 6 months ago, I unlocked YouTube community posts, and my first ever post had the RIIC Iceberg. This is a standard sort of iceberg meme with more commonly known topics on the top and more obscure stuff on the bottom. The original iceberg was actually made over a year ago with help from a bunch of users on the Arknights official Discord server. Since then I've made my own changes slowly over time, and you'll notice that the current iceberg is a lot deeper than the original one. So to celebrate 1,000 subscribers, I thought I would voice a video for the first time ever and briefly explain every single item in this iceberg. So let's get started. Starting at the very top, we have RIIC. In-game, this stands for the Rhodes Island Infrastructure Complex, also known as the base. But the image here shows a Discord channel. RIIC is a channel in the Arknights official Discord server that you have to use a bot command to join. It was originally meant for players to show off their dorm designs, but these days we mainly use it to talk about base and farming and other math stuff. 252 is greater than 243. When Arknights first launched, pretty much everyone thought 243 was the best base setup in general. But after a few months, we realized 252 could be used late game as well, sacrificing factory levels to max out the training room. After some calculations, 252 turned out to be better than 243 in pretty much every way. It produces more LMD and EXP, doesn't need as much management, and is much cheaper to set up. Stonks and Stonksant. These two emotes are based on popular internet memes, with the doctor's helmet photoshopped in. They're used very often in AKO and other Arknights Discord servers when something is either really good or really bad. Max Right 252. Buildings on the right side of the base can't be downgraded, and with only 2 power plants, the 252 setup doesn't have enough power to fully upgrade all of its buildings. This is why there are many variants of the 252 with different right side building levels. Players with the 252 setup and a maxed right side can't upgrade their factories as much, but even a maxed right 252 is better than setups with 3 power plants like 243 and 333. LS5 bad. LS5 is a supply stage that drops battle records or EXP, but compared to CE5, which drops LMD, it's a very bad stage. Instead of farming LS5, players who need more EXP should adjust their base to produce more of it, and farm CE5 to make up for the lost LMD. This will actually give you more LMD and EXP overall than farming LS5 directly. Staggered rotations. Dorms can restore at least 2 morale per hour, and most operators lose less than 1 morale per hour when working. This means you don't have to rotate all working operators into the dorms at once. If you only rest part of your base at once, you will need fewer operators overall. This will actually increase production, since you can avoid using operators with worse base skills. I made a separate video specifically about these rotations. Check it out if you want more details. Orundum farming. Factories can convert rocks and LMD into Originium shards, and trading posts can convert those shards into Orundum used for gacha pulls. Producing Orundum will hurt your operator progress though, so it's usually not recommended, but if you're a late game player without a lot of operators to build, you might want to farm for some extra pulls instead. 153吃食人. This translates to 153 Stone Eaters. 153 is a base setup that only works well for players who whale a lot. Compared to 252, it sacrifices a lot of LMD for relatively little EXP. This trade-off is only good for players who need so much EXP that they have to farm LS5 no matter what base setup they use. These players refresh sanity very often, which requires spending lots of real-life money on Originite Prime, so we call them Stone Eaters. Don't promote J. J is the only operator in the game whose base skill gets worse at E1. When promoted, he gets a base skill that reduces production based on other operators in the same trading post. Even though J is very powerful in combat, I don't advise new players to raise him, as it'll hurt your LMD production by a lot. Gnosis, a future operator, will make E1J better, but this requires promoting Gnosis to E2. Peter's MS Paint charts. I often hang out in the Help and RIIC channels of the Arknights official Discord server. Base math can be a bit hard to understand, so sometimes I'll quickly make a crappy chart to explain a concept. I usually don't give exact numbers and measurements, since in my opinion it's more important to get the general idea across, like whether something is better or worse in some situation. Eya Slug. In the Obsidian Festival event, the boss, Pompeii, is a giant slug that shoots fireballs at your operators. This is pretty similar to Eyjafjalla's S3 with arts damage, multi-target, and a wide range. Someone decided to merge them together, and now she's a Discord emote. I don't really know why I put her in this iceberg, but I'm in charge, so I do what I want. Downgradable office, please. Buildings on the right side of the base cannot be downgraded. Since base setups with 2 power plants don't have enough power to upgrade everything, upgrading a right side building will permanently lock you out of upgrading some factories or trading posts. The office has the least useful upgrades, since all they give are extra recruitment slots and a tiny LMD discount. 2 recruitment slots is already enough to spend all of your permits, so upgrading the office is basically just a huge waste of power. If your office isn't maxed, you can use the extra power to upgrade some factories or trading posts, which is a much better improvement to your base. Older players with max level offices have been asking for a downgrade option for years, but HG hasn't responded. So unless something changes in the future, we're stuck with worse base setups. 12F sucks. 12F has a 20% clue search base skill that looks pretty good at first. Only a few operators like Gitano and Chen have higher numbers. But clue search speed is also increased by rarity and promotions, and since 12F is a 2-star with no promotions available, he actually sucks. In fact, any E2 6-star can perform better even without any reception base skills. Luzark's Planner. Luzark's Planner is a very advanced and highly customizable planner that gives base and farming advice. It has a wide variety of options that you can tweak to your personal situation, and uses linear programming and other advanced things that I don't understand. If used properly, it will give you a more accurate plan than pretty much anything else out there. Base. This emote is just a cropped screenshot of the in-game base button. I'm not actually sure about its origins, but I've heard that it's a joke about how the base will never get out of beta. This image has also been edited into many variations, some of which I made myself. Rainbow Six Siege Infinite Morale. Rainbow Six Siege operators all have the base skill Team Rainbow for the control center. Since they all stack with each other, it's possible to reduce the morale drain in the CC to 0, or even negative, where they'll start to gain morale instead. This means they can stay in the CC forever. I made a short video on how it all works, if you're interested in the math behind this. However, HG has been releasing more control center base skills recently, so it's usually better to rotate the CC normally to increase production. Clue Bias. Some operators have a reception room base skill that increases the probability of a certain clue appearing. We aren't given exact numbers, so there are many unanswered questions about how this works. There's also a theory that operators boost clue frequencies from their own factions, regardless of base skill. For example, Rope is affiliated with Rhodes Island, so maybe she boosts the probability of clue 7. Anyways, we don't have enough data to make conclusions about any of this, really. Whis. Shu is a Discord emote made from Shaw's base animation. Whis is the same thing, though with the colors inverted and the name reversed. We generally use it as a sort of smug reaction, and it's particularly common in the RIIC Discord channel. We've also photoshopped Shaw's face onto a bunch of other emotes, resulting in several abominations. r/Arknights help thread. The Arknights subreddit has a help center mega thread that refreshes daily. Unfortunately, the answers and advice are generally pretty bad, especially when it comes to base-related questions. You only get upvotes if you agree with everyone else, so the answers you see are only the ones that follow the hive mind, regardless of whether they're correct. This problem is present throughout the entire subreddit, not just in this mega thread. It's basically just one big echo chamber, but I'm going to stop ranting about it now because we haven't even gotten to the good stuff. Sanity value of EXP. The value of EXP, or battle records, is tricky to calculate. Back in the day we used LS5, where 30 sanity would be equal to the battle records you got, plus a bit of LMD. But for most players it's best to avoid farming LS5 completely, so this doesn't really work. For most players it's better to use drones on EXP factories to get all the EXP they need, which decreases LMD production. We can calculate the value of EXP based on this by equating a drone used on gold or LMD to a drone used on EXP. We use this newer value for most of our updated base calculations, like this spreadsheet from Sci-Fi Gemini. GamePress Comments. GamePress is a website that provides guides and resources for Arknights along with a bunch of other gacha games. Most articles have a comments section similar to Reddit, where there's an upvote and downvote system. You're also allowed to comment anonymously, so it's about as good as you'd expect. Like the subreddit, it's also not a very good place to look for advice. Base E2 Return on Investment. Return on investment, or ROI, is a measure of how long an investment takes to pay off. The investment in this case are promotions to unlock more base skills. There are a bunch of operators worth promoting to E1 for base skills such as Frostleaf and Gravel, with relatively short ROIs. In general, it's worth getting E1 promotions for trading post and factory base skills that are better than what you currently have. Meanwhile, E2 promotions for base skills are almost never worth getting, since they have extremely long ROIs. Texas, for example, takes over 60 years to pay off. Clock. This is the base report clock. The values it shows seem to make no sense, so no one really cared about it and everyone just ignored it when looking at their base reports. One day, Cube from the Arknights official Discord server decided to find out. After a few months of testing, he and his goons figured out what the clock values mean and how a bunch of variables interact with it. He even wrote an entire research paper about his results. But basically, the clock is useless and deserves to be ignored. 342. 342 is an unusual base layout. It's basically a 252, but one of the factories is replaced by a trading post. This setup produces a lot of LMD, but won't produce enough EXP for most players. Most players using 342 will swap periodically to 252 and back to manage their EXP production. The 342 is also useful for Orundum farming. Producing Orundum takes a lot of LMD, and a normal 252 might not make enough. Farming Orundum also involves switching a trading post and factory to processing rocks every once in a while, which 342 can handle without any issues. Pure Thighs. Pure Stream was released in a charity event with the World Wildlife Fund in a special pack for $1. She has a very good base skill. It boosts gold production by 40%, or even 60% if you're using a 342 base. A lot of base enthusiasts bought this pack to get Pure Stream because we really wanted that base skill, because we are kind and charitable people. Oh, and Nea zoomed into her splash art and made this Discord emote. 513. 513 is a base layout that maximizes the number of trading posts. It's basically useless for most players, since the single factory can't produce nearly enough gold. Flegias used a 513 to set a base report record of 386,000 LMD produced in a single day. Since trading post orders aren't recorded in the base report until they're collected, Flegias waited until his trading posts had 25 orders each before collecting, which makes the game think he produced hundreds of thousands of LMD in a single day. Flegias also set a similar record for Orundum using the same trick. In a single day, he produced over 5,000 Orundum. Whisperain bad. Whisperain's base skill boosts Rosmantis by up to 20%. However, she only boosts office refreshes by 20% compared to 40 to 45% for other office base skills. So using Whisperain and Rosmantis means boosting factory production but sacrificing office refresh rate. Several months ago, I did some calculations to find out if this trade-off is worth it. Turns out, it's really not. Office refreshes give you chances to get yellow search from recruitment, and even in the worst case, the refreshes you lose with Whisperain are worth a lot more than the extra factory boost with Rosmantis. This gap only gets wider if you care about recruiting operators themselves and not just the yellow certs. More recently though, Salyak was released. Her base skill boosts Whisperain's office rate by another 20% for 40% total. This means Whisperain is worth using if your office is maxed and you don't have any 45% office base skills. If you do have some 45% skills, the extra 5% refresh rate might still be worth more than boosting Rosmantis by another 20%. 351. 351 is a rare and somewhat cursed base setup for new players. It's slightly better than 243, but worse than all 252 variants. 351's main advantage is the extremely low setup cost. It's less than half as expensive to set up as 252, and less than a quarter as expensive as 243. However, it doesn't have enough power to max out the training room, so it can't be used late game. Setting it up is also very confusing. For example, you need to max out a factory and immediately downgrade it afterwards to unlock yellow EXP. This in turn requires 3 power plants, 2 of which you'll end up destroying. So while it's the best base setup for new accounts, new players probably shouldn't use it. It's only really useful for experienced players making alt accounts. Phallic 252. One day I decided to rearrange the factories in my base into a certain shape. This took hundreds of drones and several days to complete, and from a pragmatic point of view, it was a complete waste. But hey, I think it makes my base look better. My Phallic 252 has also inspired many others to arrange their facilities in similar ways. Tier 2 headhunting permits. The Green Search Shop has 3 tiers. The second tier sells headhunting permits for 450 Green Search each, along with some recruitment permits and Tier 3 materials. Back in the day, players were generally advised to avoid the headhunting permits and go for the recruitment permits and materials instead. But actual calculations show that the headhunting permits are better purchases than the mats for most players. If you spend Originite Prime on Arundum instead of Sanity refreshes, the Tier 2 headhunting permits are at least 20% better than the mats. E1J plus Mr. Nothing. At Elite 1, J's second base skill decreases production if someone in the same trading post boosts production. This doesn't apply to Mr. Nothing though, whose base skill boosts production based on Worldly Plight. This means that E2 Mr. Nothing is the best operator to use with E1J as long as you can give him enough Worldly Plight from operators like Mulberry and Dusk. This interaction between J and Mr. Nothing isn't too useful for most players though, mostly because you need to E2 this guy on top of managing Dusk's morale and upgrading the office. E1J Matrix. Here's another one about J. His capacity debuff depends on the total production boost from other operators and is rounded down after adding them up. This means we need to look at pairs of operators to figure out who works best with him instead of individual operators. That's why Sci-Fi Gemini created this beautiful table to visualize how possible operator pairs work with J. From this we can tell that the only pairs worth considering are Lapland Texas and Silver Ash Cliffheart. Every other pair is 90% or worse, which is the same thing as using 3 normal 30% base skills. 9 Colored Deer base mats. 9 Colored Deer has a very unique base skill for the workshop, and it's extremely good. Whenever she fails to make a byproduct, she gets a pity point based on how much morale she spent. At 40 pity points, she makes a guaranteed byproduct. What makes this broken is the fact that you can build up pity points by crafting base materials. Most older players probably have hundreds of these, since you solely get them through missions and login rewards, and they're basically useless once your base is finished. With 9 Colored Deer, these huge stockpiles of base mats can be used to build up pity points, which can in turn be used to give guaranteed elite material byproducts. Friend Credit Marginal Value. To compare base setups accurately, we need to account for friend credits, since different base layouts can get different amounts of friend credits each day. For example, 243 gets 200 per day from its high ambient storms, while 252 only gets 72 or 80. The value of friend credits is hard to calculate, since the offers in the shop all have different efficiencies. This leads to diminishing returns, where the first credits you spend are worth more than the ones you spend later. If you already have a bunch of credits, any additional credits will be worth less. To calculate the value of credits and compare base setups, I started a project about 1.5 years ago to gather data. We posted our friend credit shops each day for around 4 months, ending up with over 1,700 screenshots in total. I also made a very big and laggy spreadsheet to process the data and run calculations. The numbers it outputted were used in Sci-Fi Gemini's base calculation spreadsheet to make it more accurate. Buy Hungs. When pulling unlimited banners, you get data contracts, which can be used to buy the operators on the banner. It's basically a pity system. Leftover data contracts can be used to buy elite materials. Alternatively, you can buy duplicates of the 5-star operator for yellow certs. For most players, this is actually better than buying elite mats by at least 50%. The 13 yellow certs can buy headhunting tickets, worth a lot more than the elite materials. r/OKBuddy RIIC Tart. This is a subreddit I created. We post our low-effort memes and shitposts here, but you can also do things like post your research results, participate in competitive sporting events, celebrate a holiday, and discuss current events. 1 million LMD per day. I previously discussed how Flegas produced 360,000 LMD in a single day using a 513 base. A few months later, he decided to push his record even higher to 1 million LMD. Using an alt account and his strategies from the previous record, he stashed 125 trading post orders over an entire month. But this time, he also needed around 140 Originite Prime to spend on drones to speed up his trading posts even further. But near the end, when he had almost stashed enough TP orders and collected enough primes, Flegas accidentally claimed all of his orders. He still needed hundreds of gold bars to get the 1 million LMD record, With just a few hours before the daily reset, we scrambled to find a way to get the gold bars he needed. Flycast bought the gold bars in the green search shop and used up dozens of Arknight primes to drone gold factories, and in the end, he just barely hit his target. 1 million LMD in a single day, with a margin of only 500. After months of planning and saving up, Flycast's record would be placed in the RIIC Hall of Fame, where it stands to this day, and surely will for a long time to come. Oh, also he's going for a 100 million total LMD record right now, but that'll probably take a while. Gladia bug. Gladia's base skill grants bonus production to Abyssal Hunters and factories, but on release, her base skill also worked with 4 non-Abyssal operators. This meant her base skill was incredibly broken for a while on the CN server. She could boost every single factory by 70 to 90%. In a 252 base, this would mean an overall boost of up to 390%. Unfortunately, this was fixed after a few days. Nowadays, her base skill only works with the 3 actual Abyssal Hunters, which means it's pretty mediocre. The Abyssal Hunters basically become 30% workers, and Gladia's morale drains too quickly for them to be useful for very long. Important drop rates. Arknights Farming Guide and Important Drop Rates is a very old spreadsheet that attempts to calculate which stages are best to farm. Unfortunately, its calculations were very simple and inaccurate, so nearly all of its stage recommendations were wrong. For example, here it says 1.7 is worse than 5.10 and 6.5. A while later, Mo published his own farming spreadsheet that was much more accurate, but also much more complex. Back then, there was a lot of debate between these spreadsheets, since EN players had been using the older one for so long. But eventually, the player base accepted Mo's spreadsheet as the better one, and the old important drop rates sheet has been mostly forgotten by now. Ionized Fiammetta. Fiammetta's base skill basically lets you refresh an operator's morale to full every 12 hours. This means you can let a team of 3 operators work constantly by refreshing one of them with Fiammetta twice a day. Shamara, Tequila, and Baibeek is the best team of 3 by far, effectively boosting production by 173%, so you'll want to boost them with Fiammetta if you can. But things get weird if you have Kafka. She has the same base skill as Baibeek, so if you have both at Elite 2, you won't have to use Fiammetta to reset Baibeek. You can just swap to Kafka instead. This means you can use 1/3 of Fiammetta's refreshes on something else. For example, in this schedule, I use half of those extra refreshes on Scene, and the other half on Calcit. So Fiammetta ends up boosting Tequila's trading post to 100% uptime, while also increasing Scene's uptime, while also giving Calcit 100% uptime as well. I call this ionized Fiammetta because the trading post is losing refreshes while other buildings gain them, like how atoms become ionized by losing or gaining electrons. It's also just a cool name, I think. Single target dorm skill targeting. Single target dorm skills are skills that boost the morale recovery of a single operator besides the one with the skill. Examples include Shining, Lancet, and many others. The game doesn't specify which operator gets the boost, so we can only figure it out through lots and lots of testing. We have a decent idea of how this targeting works, and it's a pretty complicated algorithm. Explaining the whole thing would take too long, so pause right now if you want to read it. Sci-Fi Gemini says it's not completely correct though, and we're still not completely sure how it works. Sanity value of a pull. Unlike materials, LMD, and EXP, the value of a pull isn't directly related to sanity. Different players will value it differently. New players might refresh sanity to build up their operators quickly, while veterans with stacked accounts might want to farm Morundum to prepare for future banners instead. We can estimate how much a particular player values gacha pulls by looking at some of the actions they take. Here's a neat chart by Nea with some examples. If a player converts Originite Prime to a Rundum, instead of refreshing sanity, they consider a pull to be worth more than 450 sanity. If a player values a pull as high as 888 sanity, they should farm a Rundum instead of normal mats. Remember when I said that the Tier 2 Green Cert headhunting tickets were a good offer? Here's more evidence. Most players convert Originite Prime to a Rundum, so they value a pull more than 450 sanity. This is also more than 371, so they should buy the headhunting tickets too. Ambience to clue search formula. One of the loading screen tips says that dorm ambience affects clue search. But for a long time, we didn't know exactly how. So one day, Cube decided to find out. He's the same guy who wrote the clock research paper that I talked about earlier. After a couple weeks of testing, Cube had the formula figured out. It's a discrete function that caps out at 4000 ambience and a 15% clue search boost. So basically doesn't matter for most players, since even level 1 dorms let you hit the 4000 ambience cap. We also found out that some older figures are wrong. From CN info, we thought that leveling the reception room gave more of a benefit than it really did, probably because they didn't account for the ambience bonus when doing their testing. Negative recruitment. Negative recruitment was a recruiting strategy based on getting tags to drop on purpose. PeterYR theorized that recruitment results were forced to avoid matching dropped tags, which would allow us to narrow down the pool of recruitment possibilities in an unusual way. For example, ranged and survival guarantees Jessica, but what if we selected melee and survival and the melee tag dropped? Perhaps that would force the game to give us a non-melee operator, which would lead to Jessica as well. We started looking at possible tag combinations to use this on, and Samidare even started working on updating his recruitment calculator to support this technique. Unfortunately, the game doesn't work this way. The very next day, we had a counterexample where the supporter tag dropped but still resulted in Orchid. PeterYR's original theory was unfortunately dead. Trading Post Constants. When leveled up, Trading Posts can produce LMD orders that cost 3 or 4 gold bars. These orders consume gold and produce LMDs slightly faster than the 2-bar ones, which means Trading Post upgrades give a small boost to production. Sci-Fi Gemini created a spreadsheet to estimate this boost based on CN data for the rates of each order type. He found that fully upgrading a Trading Post boosted it by about 2.7%. The tailoring base skill found on Shamara, Bybik, Kafka, and Bina will increase the rate of 4-bar orders, which increases this boost. Tequila also affects this boost, since he makes 4-bar orders worth much more, so Sci-Fi calculated values for these skills as well. We use these values to calculate base production more accurately. Usually we just copy these constants from Sci-Fi's sheet and paste them into whatever we're doing calculations with. Idle Whisperain. Whisperain's base skill grants a bonus to Rosmontis when Whisperain's in the office. If your office refreshes are full, the office worker won't actually lose morale. Someone on Reddit suggested using this mechanic to keep Whisperain in the office for longer, to boost Rosmontis for a longer period of time. So I was curious and did some math to see if this was worth doing. It's definitely not. The refreshes are worth much more than the extra factory boost for Rosmontis, so please don't try this at home. E2 for Paradox Arundum. A few minutes ago I talked about how different players value Arundum and gacha pulls differently. But what if someone cared so much about Arundum that they were willing to promote operators to Elite 2 just for the 200 Arundum from their Paradox simulations? Where would they fall on Nea's table? Let's take Vigna for example. It costs around 2200 to level and promote her to E2, and you get a third of a pull in return. This means you would have to value a single pull at over 6700 sanity to make this a good investment. So yeah, it's a pretty terrible decision for almost all players. It's already very rare for someone to value a pull at over 900 sanity, so 6700 is pretty insane. But hey, you never know. Maybe there's someone out there who really wants the next limited op. Sanity values of base mats. Earlier, I talked about how the 9-colored deer has an extremely broken base skill, partially because she can convert base materials into elite material byproducts. This means that elite materials now have an actual value instead of being completely worthless to older players. By calculating the expected values of all relevant base material recipes, I was able to find sanity values for all the base bricks and boxes for each tier. This has implications for the friend credit shop, as buying base materials will sometimes be better than buying elite materials. For example, a tier 2 base brick with a 50% discount is a better offer than any tier 1 elite mat with no discount. Furniture rotations. Putting furniture in a dorm gives it more ambience, which makes it recover morale faster. You'll usually want to max out ambience, but some base skills can benefit from having low morale. Dusk will boost Mr. Nothing when her morale is below half, and Ling will boost Rosmontis in the same situation. In some situations, you can benefit from removing furniture periodically to keep their morale lower. However, you get more friend credits with higher ambience, so you want to avoid having furniture removed during the daily reset. I don't recommend trying to do this at all unless you know what you're doing. 1660 credits. As you probably know, it's not possible to save up an indefinite number of friend credits since you can only save up to 300 credits between daily resets. So what's the highest number of credits you can possibly have at once? Nea did a bit of theory crafting on this and ended up with a maximum of 1660. This requires multiple days of setup and a cooperative friend. She then attempted the record for real and almost hit the theoretical limit with 1640 credits. Just like Flegaus's records, this is listed in the RIIC Hall of Fame. Unfortunately, HG removed one of the tricks that made this record possible, so currently no one can come close to beating Nea's record. It might stay undefeated in the Hall of Fame forever. $20 equals 1 apple and 1 orange. When Mo published his farming spreadsheet, it was much more complex than anything else EN had at the time. Mo explained his new methods and why older ones were bad with an analogy to buying groceries. But EN being EN, as soon as the math started, people got confused. Many others tried to defend the older, simpler calculations with very questionable arguments. J floating point error. For those unfamiliar with programming, computers aren't always the best at dealing with fractions or floating point numbers. Similar to how we can't represent 1/3 perfectly with our base 10 number system, computers will struggle with some fractions as well. J at Elite 1 will reduce the trading post capacity by 1 for every 10% of production from other operators. Since this rounds down, J will sometimes be off by 1 due to floating point errors. In this example, Catapult gives 30% production, so J should reduce capacity by 3. But J only reduces capacity by 2, probably because the floating point calculations are slightly off. Swapped office and training room. The right side of the base includes the reception room, workshop, office, and training room in that order. At least, that's how most players have it set up. But did you know that you can actually swap the office and training room? The game will force you to build the reception room and workshop where they are, but you can actually build the training room on the 3rd floor. There's really no gameplay benefit to doing this though, since new players probably won't want to rush masteries, and office refreshes are very valuable. Trust gain formula. Having more dorm ambience will give operators in the base more trust, but the formula behind the trust gain was unknown for a long time. After a lot of testing, Oxide figured them out, and it's a bit complicated. Anyways, here's what it looks like on a graph. The formulas are logarithmic, not linear, so you won't see a proportional trust gain if you upgrade your dorms. For example, maxed out dorms will only get up to twice as much trust as a base with 2 power plants, despite having 4 to 5 times the ambience. Pensive Mudrock. When I crowdsourced data to analyze the RNG of the friend credit shop, Hayata suggested that I set up a bot to remind people daily to post their shop data. And thus, Pensive Mudrock was born. For 2 months, she pinged us at every daily reset, and it was with her help that I collected the massive dataset that we have today. But all things come to an end, and eventually, Pensive Mudrock had to be shut down. Rotating 28,794 friends. Last year, Cube found something interesting in a game file called cluedata.json. It seemed to suggest that clues sent by our friends would give 25 friend credits when expiring, and that it would be impossible to have more than 7.2 million credits at once. To reach this theoretical maximum, you'd need to receive 10 clues each from 28,794 friends, every single day. Since you can only have 50 friends at once, you'd have to rotate them out after receiving the clues to collect clues from the next batch. Obviously, this is very impractical, but perhaps this could finally beat Nea's record in the Hall of Fame. Unfortunately, when Vask tested this theory a couple weeks later, we found that clues don't actually give anything when expiring, so Nea's record was still safe. For Male Hell Og 2. A long time ago, there was a user named Frozen in Fate. Fate had a large collection of Vermeil-based rotations for different operators and base layouts. These were given names like Vermeil Hell 1 Red 1 and Vermeil Hell Og 2. Depending on which operators you had, one of these might be optimal for your base. Unfortunately, sometime in late 2020, Fate went to work for Mr. Bezos and was forced to stop playing Arknights. His Discord account has also been dead since then, with no messages in AKO since October 2020. And that's the bottom of the iceberg. Thanks to all of you for subscribing, sharing, or just watching my videos. I never thought my channel would get as far as 1,000 subscribers, but it's nice to see that so many people enjoy watching my videos. I originally started my series of 60-second videos because honestly a lot of Arknights guides out there are way longer than they have to be. I was also inspired by Mad Ice King, who makes similarly short videos on Robin from Smash Bros. I wanted people to be able to quickly watch and share my videos, so I also make the text on them relatively large to make it readable from Discord's tiny video player. In the future, I plan to keep making these short guides, but I also want to revisit some of my older ones. The strict time limits mean my videos sometimes leave out a lot of important details, like my 80-second videos on the base and rotating operators. I don't think I'll be doing a lot of voiced videos in the future, at least not in the near future. This video was already a bit of a pain to make, and it's a lot easier to just put text onto a screen. Anyways, that'll be all from me today. Thanks again for 1,000 subscribers, and I'll see you all in the next video.
I am the one, I'm here, infiltrated. Your time has come to be downgraded. I've already won, as far as can see, so keep your eyes on me.